I'm here today and I'm talking to the wonderful Jody Day of Gateway Women in the UK. Hi, Jody. How are you?
Hi there. It's nighttime here, but it's good morning for you,
It
I
is
hear.
good morning here, yeah, and I'm watching the sun just come around and it's probably going to reflect off the car outside the window right in my eye, so we'll deal with that as it happens.
Oh, I presume that was the beach
Oh,
reflecting.
that's the beach. Yeah, no, I'm actually in Northern California today, so I am in wine country. So
Oh,
that is the lovely autumn sun reflecting in my eye.
beautiful.
So Jody is, as I said, the founder of Gateway Women in the UK, and she is also the author. Do you have a copy that you can wave in the air?
What, you mean a handy
A
copy?
handy copy of Rocking the Life Unexpected 12 Weeks to Your Plan B for a Meaningful and Fulfilling Life Without Children. And I love
That's
that cover. Look at those
Thank you very much.
wonderful ladies.
Thank you.
So, can you tell us a bit, without going into all your story or as much as your story as you want to go into, a little bit about how Gateway Women came about, how you came to be the founder, and how you decided to put everything you know into a book, which is basically a program, really.
Yes, it is. Thank you. Well, as you know, this it's definitely the life unexpected. And it's my plan B, although I wouldn't have called it that before. Um, in many ways, the book came out, well, Gateway Women came out really of the fact that when I kind of realized, sort of with a thump, aged 43 and a half, that I was definitely never going to be a mum. Um, it was actually a February afternoon that I realized it was a very precise moment, that moment when I just knew, okay, that's it. It's not going to happen. And I kind of came out of denial about being childless, all in one go, and sort of fell headfirst into the grieving process. But what I did at first was I started kind of looking for support. So I went online and I was looking for support around, not having children. All I could find was an awful lot of sites about trying to conceive, which I hadn't actually got into at the time because I was so in denial. I'd never actually identified as infertile, so I had never looked at those sites. And then what a new term that I came across, which was child free, and I found some sort of child free sites, mostly in the US, and actually they scared the hell out of me, because the tone of the ones I came across at first, I have found a couple of great ones, particularly Laura Carroll's work, which I really love. But, calling sort of parents breeders and, very anti kids, very anti parents. And I just knew that, that didn't resonate with me at all. And so I kind of went away and I kind of looked for books. And interesting enough, even when I would speak to therapists or any kind of support that I could access, I didn't find that anybody understood the depth of what I was going through or how difficult it was. And I had and I found with my friends that when I tried to talk to them about it, I would always be met with what I call the miracle baby story, and I'm sure you're familiar with them. And it didn't really matter what I said. It's like it was vroom, they were straight in with the "don't worry, I know this woman and she met this man who he was on remand, she was in remission, they've got twins. What are you worrying about? Whatever, some version of some bizarre outcome. And I've come to think of this as like, someone comes to you and say, I've gone bankrupt, and someone says, "Don't worry, you'll win the lottery."
Yeah.
It's do you know what I mean? It's like or having a sort of a business strategy based on finding £50 notes in the street. It's just like, you know, this is not just not real. It's actually really unhelpful and insulting. I understand why people do it, but it doesn't make it any easier to deal with. And then I had this amazing conversation with a girlfriend of mine, very close girlfriend, and and this was actually just before I'd kind of come out, realize. And I said to her, I'm beginning to think that it might not happen for me, I might not get to be a mum. And, can you I really need to sort of talk about that. And she said to me, it's not okay for you to be, for me, it's not okay for me for you to be okay with that. I can't handle it.
Wow.
And actually, she's a kind of call a spade person. And I actually respected her for owning the fact that it was about her.
Yeah.
But that's that. I couldn't find any help anywhere. So being a writer and being a blogger, I've been blogging for a few years. I've been journaling for ages, and I just was sick of the sound of the inside of my head, and I didn't seem to be moving along at all. So I started an online blog called Gateway Women. Yeah, and the very first day I got my piece of PR, the day after the first blog came out. And women from all over the world started writing back to me saying, I thought it was just me. How could you be on the inside of my head? I thought I was going crazy. And here we are,
And here we are, yeah.
Here we are, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really amazing that there really aren't resources out there, that this is a topic that, is so prevalent, and yet it's just not talked about. Yeah, I mean, the responses like you talk about from your friend are just, really incredible. But you're absolutely right that it is that people, I think, don't know how to handle this conversation. It's not something that people are taught to do. And I know you mentioned there about kind of diving headlong into your grief, and from that point of, okay, this is not going to happen to me, and diving headlong into that grieving process. Which I find really interesting, because I certainly didn't do that. I lingered in the denial phase for a long time and really didn't understand that, that this was a loss and that something that I needed to grieve. So, and I think there's, a lot of people have that point, are in that position where they understand their loss. Nobody around them understands their loss. And so I know you have some interesting ideas on this, so how do you go about, how do you grieve something that other people around you don't understand?
Well, I guess first to backtrack for a minute, when I say I dived headfirst into the grieving process, that's with the wisdom of hindsight. I had absolutely no idea that I was grieving. And I think one of the reasons I was reaching out and looking for support was because I just knew that I couldn't cope with how I felt. And I couldn't seem to put it into any context. And I think I lingered in denial for a very long time, for the last sort of, from the age of sort of 39 to 43 and a half, I was in denial and doing some crazy shit because I was in denial, sort of going out with people who weren't right for me after my divorce, because I was just absolutely determined post-divorce I was going to find someone and do IVF. You know what I mean? I was just on a mission, and completely unshakably convinced that that I could still sort of rescue defeat, rescue success from the jaws of defeat. It's like Freudian slip there. So for me, I mean, when I came out of denial, it was the moment when I realized that childlessness was now a permanent condition. Yeah. That it wasn't a temporary and inconvenient life stage on the way towards becoming a mum. It was permanent. And before I went I went kind of downhill into grief, I actually had sort of an epiphany that afternoon, because I started to realize ideas about the future came into my mind. And I realized that I hadn't actually thought about the future for 15 years. I'd had this one future in mind, which was becoming a mother. And any other future, I sort of pushed it away or renegotiate. Oh, I'll deal with that later, because it's like I didn't even want to put any energy into those thoughts in case somehow that psychologically affected my chances of becoming a mother. There was all kinds of weird negotiation going on about sort of undercover backroom negotiations in my subconscious. Well, we can't take that job because what about this? And we can't do that because what about this? And,
sure.
I mean, none of it was even verbalized. It was just this, I see them now as kind of, these two sort of backroom, kind of traders, the back office, and they're sort of sitting there. And thank goodness they're gone. I fired them, which is great. It's a lot more peaceful. But it wasn't until I started my training to be a psychotherapist, which happened sort of a year. It started the year after sort of I accepted I wasn't going to be a mum, and accepted in a cognitive sense rather than an emotional sense. You know, this is a fact rather than,
Right.
oh, I've accepted it. Isn't that lovely?
Right.
Skip. No, like that, not that kind of acceptance. And I was doing a weekend course as part of my foundation course. So I did like this really amazing course in the first year of my training, which is like a sort of whistle stop introduction to psychotherapy and counselling. And you sort of do sort of 16 theories, you know, it's kind of um, and we were doing a weekend course on grief with this amazing woman who's worked with, who's really got into working with dying people, and during the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. And I mean, just a woman, you know, one of those things you just think, okay, I've just actually met a proper wise old soul. And this was classically happening on my weekend, my birthday, this course. And but I was really responding very deeply to the material. And I kind of went up to her in the kind of lunch break and said, you know, kind of, I said, you know, what's happening here? Because I was a little bit nervous because I was coming up with such deep stuff in the group. And first of all, she said two things to me. One thing to me, which really is one of those comments that has kind of helped me ever since. She said, "You have a gift for going very deep, and also for coming back. That gives other people permission to do the same." And it was a wonderful validation that my kind of sensitivity and how strongly I feel things kind of wasn't actually a problem, that actually it was a gift to others that I could do that. And then I kind of, over the course of the weekend, I just suddenly realized that the reason this made so much sense to me was because I was grieving. You know, I completely understood. It wasn't theoretical for me. This stuff was just, oh yeah, I was just getting it every single time. So I went away after that weekend and I looked at the grief model that she'd introduced us to and various other things, and I applied it to childlessness and to my experience, and the fit was like that. I mean, totally like that. And then a few months later, I did my first Gateway Women group. So I did a sort of a 10-week group, and which was terrifying, you know, because people said to me, you know, you seem to have something that we want. And I thought, first of all, really? And then how can is it even possible to share what I've got? You know, is this teachable? Is this shareable? So you know, I did that, and it was an amazing experience for me and for them, my gutsy original pioneers. And one of the modules that I taught was applying the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief model to the experience of childlessness. And that was my first time of seeing how it worked for other people, and how relieving it was for them too to go, oh, so you mean this is grief? You mean I'm not just going crazy? You mean I'm not going to feel this shit for the rest of my life? And it's like, you know, and that was my first experience of like, okay, this is hugely helpful for other people as well.
Great. Yeah, and it really is interesting that you're going through that, and you do feel as if you're losing your mind. And it's not until you meet somebody else and talk to somebody else, and you start sharing stories, that you realize, holy moly, actually, this is perfectly normal. And I
Yes.
can remember, I don't remember who it was now, but first talking to someone who'd been through this same experience, and just having that moment of, you did that too? Oh, you thought that too? What?
Yeah.
No, you can't, because that's my craziness. And no. Actually, it's kind of a universal craziness.
What, you too thought of kind of selling all your possessions, changing your name, going to India and working in an orphanage?
Yeah.
What was your Mother Teresa moment? What were you going to do?
What was my what? Sorry.
Your Mother Teresa moment.
My Mother Teresa moment. Yeah, mine's AIDS orphans in South Africa.
Right.
And a number of years ago, I had the opportunity to visit South Africa and an orphanage. And you know, at that time, this was long before I was really, you know, deep into. I knew I wanted children. I hadn't yet found Mr. Fabulous and found that person, you know, that I wanted to do that with. And so that all came back. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go off and do that and rescue all these children. So, yeah.
I had it all set up in my mind that I was going to go to Laos or Cambodia, and I was going to kind of work in this orphanage on the Mekong River, and I was going to turn into this kind of very sort of emaciated but sort of gracefully peaceful sort of old English lady with two long grey plaits that you know that when I died, the children, you know, I'd have this kind of almost mythical sort of, you know, sort of presence that I'd been in these people's lives. And quite frankly, I blame the king and I think I a whole thing going on. And it's like, when I look back on it now, it's like, do you know, I wasn't even really thinking about the orphans.
Right.
It was actually, you know what I mean? It was not really even about them.
Yeah.
It was about, I guess, kind of dramatizing and making visible my pain. You know, it was about doing something so out there and making such a sacrifice with my life in a way that it was, I think it comes from, as you were saying, this desire to have other people see how deeply affected we are by this experience. You know, the fact is, you know, my life is never going to be the same again. And yet I look the same on the outside. And when I try to talk about it, everyone goes, you know, either like, oh, don't worry, you can adopt, or aren't you over that yet? You know, like it was the flu. Are you still banging on about that? I mean, that was like a year ago now. And it's like...
and that's my entire life that changed. So if I haven't gotten over it yet, well, you know, sorry. But,
well, I don't believe it's, you know, it's something you ever get over. I think the idea of kind of getting over it is cruel and reductive. But I mean, my experience of is that you know, not having children broke my heart. You know, properly broke my heart. But the grief healed my heart bigger. And I'm actually a bigger person. It's like my identity has expanded to include that part of me which is broken and that has my children in it. You know, my unborn children are sort of part of my heart now. I'll tear up, you know. I think I can see from your face that you know what I mean. It's not that I've left them behind. It's just I've grown around them. And they're to me.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I found that that the kind of the love and the compassion that was always inside me that would have gone to my children has kind of expanded, and I think I'm a much more compassionate and tolerant person than I used to be, and kind of you know, kind of look at other people and realize I have no idea what you've been through or what you're going through right now, just like you have no idea what I'm going through. And so, you know, there's a little more of that, giving people the benefit of the doubt. And, you know, because I think
that's both able to do, you know, the work we do, kind of helping other women, is because I agree with you. I mean, I have a bigger heart now, but I also have a more tender heart. I feel things more deeply. It's like I say there's a scar on my heart, which is, you know, which it's healed, but there's a scar, which is my childlessness, and it's a tender spot, you know, scars. And it sometimes if you hit it in just the right place, it's like, wow, that hurt, you know. But I can cope with it now, and actually I see it as more healing when I get one of those. It's just like I breathe. I push my shoulders back. And I breathe it in. Sometimes I have a little cry, and it's like it's another bit of my heart just got healed.
Yeah.
But I don't know about you, but I've developed much more compassion also for all marginalized groups. It's like, and I feel almost quite not ashamed of myself would be too strong a word, but you know, the experience of you know, not being part of the dominant group, whether it's, being a refugee, not being the kind of part of the dominant ethnicity of a group, whatever it might be that makes you a different. I have so much more empathy for that experience now.
And the thing is that we're all different. Everybody, all of us. We're all different in some way. But like you said, there's kind of a dominant group of, most likely to be this kind of person. And then, but I mean, we're all different.
Yeah.
To get deeply philosophical here.
Well, no, I mean, this work does make us philosophical, and I'm with you on that idea that you're much more tolerant towards. I mean, I've always been quite good with difficult people, and now I'm, really good with difficult people, because there's that. It's like, I think, well, as to go fully philosophical, I always think of Plato. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. You just don't know which battle it is.
No, that's very true.
Being human is, well, I mean, it's just not what it said on the tin.
No, it's not. No, contents may vary.
Yes.
I wanted to talk. I'm sorry?
It may settle in transport.
It may settle in transport. Yeah. I wonder if you could talk a little bit. I know we chatted before the call, so it's cheating because I have cheat notes down here. Okay. But a couple of things. You talked about role models earlier as well. And not finding role models when you first found yourself in this situation. So I know that you've been doing some ferreting around and digging up role models. So I wonder would you talk a little bit about some of the people that you found maybe, and maybe some of who your role models are now?
Well, it's interesting because I actually wrote an article which touched on this a couple of days ago for a new online publication in the UK called the Feminist Times, which is sort of trying to sort of bring back really intelligent feminist journalism, but very broad perspective. And I did actually name the article, but they changed it, Who's Afraid of the Childless Spinster? But because, and one of the issues is I wrote about role models in that, because when in my workshops, when I ask women to sort of list, what are the stereotypes and archetypes you can think of to describe older childless women, the first one they come up with is spinster. Spinster, old maid, aunt, mad old cat lady, career woman, witch, cougar, maybe, and I'm like, any positive ones?
Right.
None. So even in the kind of even in our sort of cultural consciousness, as abstracts, there are no positive ideas, let alone as kind of, So then we start to flesh those out into sort of people. And if I say to someone, okay, can you name, who can you name in the culture, either fictional or real people who are childless women, they usually come up with, particularly single ones, they usually come up with Miss Havisham, who you may remember from Great Expectations, Bridget Jones, Jennifer Aniston, and for British audiences, Anne Widdecombe. So what we've got there is an insane spinster, a neurotic spinster, a Hollywood woman famous for not being able to keep her man and get pregnant, and a very famous English woman who's remained a virgin throughout life. So it was like, it's extraordinary. It's like very little there to kind of, want to be. And it's like, I've spent time researching role models. I've got this great, I don't know if you've seen my board on Pinterest, which is full of, actually, you're on there. I hope you've seen that you're on there.
I haven't.
Yes.
I need to go look.
Picture of you getting to the top of a mountain. I love that picture. I'm not very good with heights, so you're a role model.
Well, I will put that link in the post below so that people can check that out. It's great.
Pinterest. It's a collaborative board. Can be so. I love the idea of us all kind of collaborating together. And there's like nearly 300 women on there now from all kinds of women. It's like, well, I think I can get behind Debbie Harry. I think I can get behind these. And so she's childless. Oh, so Stevie Nicks is childless. And so both of those childless by circumstance as well. It's really interesting. And Zaha Hadid, who's an absolutely extraordinary, probably the most famous female architect in the world at the moment, also childless by circumstance. And so it's like much more interesting women, some of the pioneers of the feminist movement, Germaine Greer, Steinem, Gloria Steinem, really, Beatrix Potter, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
Wrote the most beautiful children's book. Louisa May Alcott.
Yeah.
Lots of really wonderful. And I realized that not just when I realized I was definitely childless, but in the 10 years that led up to that, if I could have seen one woman in a newspaper, on a TV program, in a film, anything, whose situation mirrored mine, who was someone who was struggling to get pregnant, realized that it wasn't going to happen, got through that, had a tough time, worked and came out the other side and was like, didn't repress what had happened to them, but it just would have transformed my world. But I never saw that. All I saw were either women who were either cautionary tales or were shown as being sort of weird or unnatural. Glenn Close. Often the childless woman in a film is mad.
Right.
It's like there's nothing out there for us to want to be apart from mums. And actually then you go to the older generation, there are no visible older women whose power in some way doesn't derive from being grandmothers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While we're on that topic, I know that's something that you talk about in your book that I thought you had a really interesting take on. Was this, I think, a big fear for many of us is what is going to happen to us in our old age because we don't have children. And I was reading that part of your book where you talk about that. And I thought you had a really interesting take on that. So would you talk about that a little bit? Because I know that it's something that would be from that book.
Well, let's see if I can remember what I wrote. But I think it is another huge area. Sometimes I feel like taboo girl. Do you know what I mean? I think if I rip off my red jacket underneath, it's like taboo girl. It's like childlessness, infertility, singleness, menopause, aging, death. I've chosen all the really, really fun topics to talk about. But there's something about the idea that when we get old, that it's going to be really, really gloomy for us. And the first thing that for me I really realized was I think we're scaring ourselves with an idea of being old that is actually very archetypal. So it's kind of coming back to those stereotypes of the childless woman, the crazy old lady living on her own with cats. And I do say to people, I say, this woman that you're imagining in sort of 20 or 30 years' time or 40 years' time, she's actually you. Mm-hmm. She's not actually this sort of strange person that's coming towards you to scare you. She's actually you. And with all of your good qualities as well. And I say to people, if you were, if, heaven forbid, you were told you had a month to live, now, do you think who would be around you when you died? And you imagine the people there. And I said, well, over the next 30 years, are you actually planning to fall out with absolutely everybody you know? And are you planning to sort of never make any new friends and things like that? It's like, obviously, life is going to change, but, we are big-hearted women. The chances are that we are always going to have people who care about us. And I think also the fear of dying alone, as in that moment being alone, is a very human fear. I think it's a fear that everybody has, but I think if you're childless, you can't quite fudge it. You can't quite push that thought away because, sort of, I don't have to think about it because I've got kids. I think the chance of it happening to you if you don't have children is just as high because, we don't know that moment. And I think the idea of dying alone is often more about a fear of what comes before than that moment. It's about a fear of being vulnerable, powerless, dependent, fearful, all of those, that very natural fear of aging that actually lurks on the edge of all adults' consciousnesses. But once again, being childless, you can't sort of pretend it's not there.
Yeah, and I think something that you said in the book that really rang true for me was that people with children make the assumption that they will be taken care of in their old age. So that these fears they don't really address these fears because they make the assumption that they won't be alone. Whereas we go the opposite way and make the assumption that we will be alone, and those fears,
Mm.
really play on our psyche, and we could drive ourselves completely insane
Well,
worrying about this.
I have some good news for you, which is that from talking to some gateway women that I know who work in elderly palliative care and in nursing homes, that actually the women who don't have visitors are not the childless ones, because childless women on the whole have got stronger social networks. And that lasts into old age. They're more skilled at making new friends. They've learnt, as I'm sure I've learnt, if whatever I want to happen in my life, particularly as I'm single as well, I have to make it happen. I have to organise it.
Yeah.
There is no kind of nothing happens in my life unless I do it. I don't get invited anywhere. I'm single and childless. It's like I'm just this sort of invisible person floating around in the culture. It's not that I don't have friends and things like that, but I'm on the margins of society in a way that I've kind of got used to it now. And I think that some of those friends and social groups, when their children leave home, will sort of have space for me again. I don't resent them for it. I kind of understand. The shoe could have been on the other foot. Completely understand. So it's like the childless women are not the ones who are on their own. Families are very atomized now. And one of the things, the fear is I'm not going to have grandchildren, and that's really awful. But also there's this idea that if we'd had children, we'd definitely have grandchildren. I'd say, well, we of all people know that it's not a given that our children would have had children.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
when we start to actually look at some of these assumptions, and in the book I kind of unpack 4 major myths around aging without children, we do begin to see that there are a lot of erroneous assumptions that add up in this fear, and that if we look them in the face, they're not as bad as we think. And that I have a hope that that in a way, because I've experienced so much loss, and I've had to learn how to deal with that and be proactive about creating new networks in my life and reaching out to strangers, meeting people on the other side of the world like you, that in a way I'm more equipped to deal with the way that life changes as we get older than perhaps some people who are in really peachy setups right now. And then, things could fall apart, they could get divorced in their 50s, their children could live on the other side of the world, and they might not, in a way, I've had a training with, I've had so much shit already. There's part of me that feels I'm prepared.
Yeah, you talk about the networks, and I've definitely seen. I'm very fortunate to have quite a few friends who also don't have children, and as well as I will say some fabulous friends who are also mothers. So I'm not saying that I'm lucky because I have child-free friends, and but I do I am lucky to move in circles with other people who don't have children, and I have seen time and again that when those women fall on hard times, or they get sick, or I've witnessed a couple of friends who've passed away recently, and it's been they've had these incredible networks of friends, and family members, and sometimes distant family members who've rallied around and been there, and they've been far from alone. So I think that is.
I think the fear is bigger than the reality, but I don't want to minimize isolation and loneliness as well. I also feel blessed by fate, by the fact that I've got a very collaborative nature. I'm good with technology. I like people. I'm someone who naturally reaches out. Now, for example, if you're someone who is not particularly good with computers, or finds them a bit confusing, is more introverted by nature. I don't want to say that it's going to be fine and dandy for all of us, because for some people, the reaching out in this way can be really hard. And it's about thinking about ways that we can create communities in all kinds of different ways, so that we can all get included and supported. And I think, because we don't, so many of the things that used to hold us together in human society, maybe working for the same company for most of your career, living not, maybe a short drive or even a walk or a bicycle ride away from people in your family, going, being part of a church or a faith, lots of things that used to keep connections going in a soft way, that you didn't have to put a lot of effort into. It was just like, oh, morning, Mrs. Jones, maybe always going to the same, that so many of them have gone. That I think one of the scary things about not having a family is like having your own family, your own children. It's like one of the few ways left of putting down roots, of kind of, building your own net. Everyone's having to build their own networks, because there aren't very many for us to plug into anymore. And I think that if you fall outside that experience, as so many have done, it is a real situation. It's not all in our head to worry about. This is an issue, and I know it's also really hard. I know women who've actually had to stop going to their churches because because church can be so family focused as well.
Yeah.
So obviously that's on my list of things to sort out. Is also the Christian, the Christian approach on Jody's list of organisations. But no, I know someone who's going to be starting a group for kind of Christian childless women, and I think that's going to be amazing.
That's great.
That's great. Because I'm all for the women I meet and I work with through Gateway Women. I'm a great believer in what I'm trying to do is support, inspire, and empower. And the empower part of it is, it's time for you to kind of build your own networks that make sense to you. And I'm here to support, to advise, to promote. But I want everyone, it's like I want to be the catalyst for lots of us to then create a plan B for a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling to us. And I think that's different for each person. There is no one plan B.
Yeah,
absolutely. Although someone said, I thought you were going to give it to me in an envelope. They came on my retreat, and when she said that on the retreat, it turned out that quite a few people in the room, it was a plan B retreat, kind of had this secret fantasy that at a certain point I'd hand them an envelope. This is your assignment. This is your plan.
This is your plan B.
Oh, great. Jody's decided what it is for me. What do I have to do? It's like,
but maybe you should, because sometimes when somebody hands you something and tells you this is what you need to do, that's sometimes the catalyst that you need to figure out that that's actually not what you want to do at all, but you want to do quite the opposite, so that you can go off and do that.
Your new life is to be a trapeze artist.
Yay.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, somebody in the group will say, you're absolutely right. But Jody, as always, it's such a pleasure talking to you. Would you please waft your book for the camera one more time? Because it's so beautiful. Cool. And look at those ladies in their red leather jackets.
Yeah, these are wasps from World War II, from a US Air Force base. And they were actually the female fighter pilots, except they didn't go into combat. Their job was to fly the really big planes between Air Force bases and deliver planes. But they were such brave pilots that quite often, rather brilliantly, when there were really difficult missions, sometimes they would fly the planes and deliver them, because once they'd flown those planes that were apparently unflyable because they were loaded so heavy, the men could no longer say that the planes were unflyable, and they were actually called the pistol packing mamas. So that was not the life they expected.
No.
And men, and quite a few of them died, and they're an extraordinary group of women. They were born in the 1920s, and they didn't expect to be pilots in World War II. So,
Yeah, fabulous. Well,
mm,
Jody, thanks so much for talking to me today. It's been wonderful, as always. And
absolutely.
there will be, for everybody watching, there are links below in the post for Gateway Women, for Jody's book, for her Pinterest page, and whatever else I think of in the meantime. So
And
again,
actually, something that might be helpful is I'm going to be doing. I did it last year as well, an online course, because my kind of the workshop that I teach in the UK, which is called the Reignite Weekend, I've found a way to split it into 4 little short mini online workshops, which I do live like this, and I'll be running that in. I think it starts in January.
perfect. Great.
Mm,
For a Happy New Year.
yeah,
All right. Well, thanks very much, Jody. It was great talking to you.
it's been an absolute delight as always.
All right. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.